She almost didn't write it. She had folded the napkin twice and then unfolded it and set it back on the linen stack and told herself it wasn't her business. It wasn't her table. And it was the kind of thing that got a woman like her fired from a job she needed very badly. She had told herself that for 6 minutes, while refilling water glasses and pretending not to hear what she had already heard. Then she thought about the look on his face when he talked about the foundation. The way his voice had changed, just slightly, just enough, when he described what the money was for. 23 children. Rural Calabria. The school had no running water. She picked up the pen. She wrote 9 words on the corner of a cocktail napkin, tore it clean, folded it once, and carried it to table 12 on a tray with his second espresso. She set the cup. She set the saucer. She put the folded napkin beneath the saucer, face down, the way you leave something for someone to find on their own terms. She walked away without looking at him. What she didn't know was that he had already looked at her twice that evening. Once when she'd knelt down to pick up the crayon his nephew had dropped without being asked, and once when she'd said prego to a table of Americans and done it without the performance that most of the staff added. Like she meant it as a genuine thing, and not a word you said to tourists. What she didn't know was that table 12 had not been assigned to her section. She had taken it anyway, 40 minutes ago, because the server scheduled for it had a migraine and had asked her quietly in the break room, and she had said yes, because she said yes to things like that, because she was the kind of person who did. His name was Matteo Conti. She did not know this yet. She knew only that he was the kind of man who sat alone at expensive tables and seemed genuinely uninterested in being looked at, which, in her experience, separated him from every other man who had ever sat at a table like that. He reached under the saucer. His fingers found the napkin. He unfolded it in his lap, below the table's edge, without changing his expression. 9 words. Your fiancé sold the foundation account. I heard everything. He read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his jacket pocket and picked up the espresso and did not look at the woman who had left it. He stood up very slowly. Her name was Sofia Greco. She was 29 years old, and she had been working at Ristorante Settimo in the Prati neighborhood of Rome for 14 months, which was 12 months longer than she'd expected when she'd taken the job as an emergency measure after the tutoring agency she'd built over 3 years had gone under because her business partner had taken the client list and the operating account and moved to Milan and left her with the lease and the liability. She had 1,700 euros left in her savings account. She had a studio apartment on Via Condia that she could afford for 4 more months at current rates. She had a mother in Naples who called every Sunday and asked about things Sofia was not prepared to discuss, and who she loved so completely that the calls were both the best and most painful part of the week. She also had a memory that was almost photographic for spoken information, a thing that had made her an excellent tutor and that now made her a dangerous waitress in the wrong room at the wrong time. She had not meant to overhear the conversation at table 9. Table 9 was across the room, and she had been refilling the bread service at table 11 when the woman, beautiful, dark-haired, the kind of groomed that required a staff, had dropped her voice into the register of someone being conspiratorial and said to the man she was with, "The Conti account clears Thursday. We move everything to the Zurich structure before he has time to." Sofia had set down the bread and moved away. She had gone to the service station. She had stood for a moment looking at the wall and thinking about the 23 children in Calabria without running water, which she had overheard described at table 12:40 minutes before by a man who had spoken about it the way people speak about things that actually keep them awake. She picked up the pen. She was not naive. She understood that delivering that note might end her employment tonight. or this week, or eventually. She understood that she didn't know who this man was, not really, and that knowing one generous thing about a person was not the same as knowing the whole person. She understood all of this while writing 9 words on a cocktail napkin, and did it anyway, because her mother had told her once. On a Sunday call 3 years ago, when Sophia had been deciding whether to report something at a school she'd been tutoring at, "You don't have to fix it. You just have to not pretend you didn't see it." She had not pretended. Now she was carrying plates to table 4 and pretending as hard as she could that nothing had happened, which was its own kind of pretending, but felt more survivable. Behind her, across the room, the man at table 12 had risen from his chair. Matteo Conti was 41 years old. He had inherited the structure of his family's business at 32 and had spent 9 years quietly, methodically, and with considerable personal cost converting it into something that could operate in daylight, that had offices, attorneys, a legitimate board, audited accounts. He had also, because old structures do not dissolve cleanly, retained certain relationships and certain capabilities that he kept at a careful remove from the daylight operation and used only when the daylight operation's instruments were insufficient. He was engaged to Valentina Ricci, who was 34 and beautiful and had passed every assessment of character and loyalty that his world conducted, which he now understood was a statement about the limits of assessment. He stood. He smoothed his jacket. He put €30 on the table, 12 more than the check required, and he walked to the bar. His second in command, a lean man named Cesare, who had been at the corner of the bar since 8 o'clock, with a Campari he had not finished, straightened by a degree visible only to people who knew what to look for. Matteo said nothing. He placed the folded napkin on the bar between them. Cesare read it. His face did not change. He refolded it. "Thursday," Matteo said. "Today is Tuesday." "I'm aware." He looked at the room, not sweeping, not obvious, the practiced glance of a man who reads a room the way others read a page, the woman who brought the espresso. Cesare followed nothing. He'd clocked her an hour ago. Waitress, not regular section, took the table as a cover for someone sick. "Find out everything before I leave." He ordered a water. He waited. He did not look at Sofia Greco while waiting, which required more deliberateness than it should have. What Cesare found in 11 minutes, her name, her employment start date, the tutoring agency that had dissolved, the name of the business partner who had dissolved it, the studio apartment on Via Candia, the mother in Naples. He found that she had no connection to anyone in Valentina's network. He found that she had taken table 12 as a favor, not an assignment. He found, because he was thorough, that she had been passed over for a promotion 2 months ago, that had gone to a server with worse reviews and a cousin in management, and that she had said nothing about it to anyone, except, apparently, her closest colleague, a Moroccan pastry chef named Amir, who had used the words, "She just keeps working harder," in a text that Cesare had absolutely no right to access, and had accessed anyway. He gave Matteo a summary in 90 seconds. Matteo listened. He set down the water glass. He looked, for the first time directly, at Sofia Greco, who was at that moment carrying a tray of desserts to table 7, with the careful, braced posture of someone who knows they are being looked at and has decided the only response is to do their job extremely well. "Don't approach her here," he said. "Tonight," Cesare nodded. "Make sure she gets home." Another nod. Matteo left. At the door, he paused, just a half-second, the breath of a delay, and looked back once. She was at the service station, her back to him, stacking cups with the clean economy of someone whose hands know what they're doing without being told. He went through the door. Outside, the Rome night was cool and smelled of the river. He called Valentina from the car. She answered on the second ring, warm and easy, the way she always answered, and he talked to her for 4 minutes about nothing in particular, learning everything he needed to know from the specific texture of what she didn't say. He ended the call. He looked out the window at the city. He had thought she was careful. He had thought he was careful. He had thought the careful thing was to trust slowly and verify continuously and keep a distance between the things that mattered most and the people closest to him. He had thought a great many things that turned out to be insufficient. The woman with the cocktail napkin had known none of this and had written 9 words anyway. He thought about that for a long time. She was called into the manager's office the next morning. She had been expecting it. She had gone home on the 23 tram and eaten cold pasta standing over the kitchen sink and thought about it with the clear, tired eye of someone who is accustomed to paying for doing the right thing. The manager's name was Giordano, and he was not a cruel man. He was a cautious one, which in her experience came to the same thing when it mattered. He told her that the booking for table 12 last night had been a private reservation, that the guest had specific privacy expectations, and that he had received a call that morning expressing some concern about the evening service. She waited. Was there any unusual interaction? He said. She looked at him. She thought about the 9 words. She thought about Thursday, which was tomorrow, and 23 children, and a Zurich structure she didn't understand the details of, but understood the intention of well enough. I brought the gentleman his espresso, she said. He was very polite. I had no unusual interaction. Giordano studied her for a moment. She met the study without flinching. Fine, he said. Back to your section. She went back to her section. She was on the lunch service by 11. She was refilling a carafe at table 3 when she felt the particular change in air quality that accompanies the arrival of someone the room adjusts to. And she looked up, and Matteo Conti was standing at the host station in a dark coat, talking to no one, looking at her, not the way men usually looked at her, not with assessment or calculation, or the slow particular inventory she had learned to receive without expression, with something more direct and less complicated than any of that. Like he had come specifically to look at her. And now he was. She set the carafe down. She walked to the host station. The gentleman at table 12 last night, she said quietly so the host couldn't hear. He'd like a table? Lunch, Matteo said. And I'd like you to sit across from me. She looked at him. The restaurant was filling with the late morning crowd. Giordano was visible through the kitchen window, and she had 3 tables whose orders she hadn't taken yet. I'm working, she said. I know. I'll wait until your break. She looked at him for 1 more second. Then she said, 12:30. The table near the window in the back. It's not visible from the kitchen. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. You've thought about visibility. I've thought about a lot of things, she said, since last night. She went back to her tables. She sat down across from him at 12:31. She had eaten half a bread roll in the break room and told Amir she'd be at the back table, which Amir had received with the particular stillness of someone who has been waiting to hear something and is pretending they haven't. Matteo was already there. Coffee, water for her, which she hadn't asked for. My name is Matteo Conti, he said. I know, she said. I looked you up this morning. He looked at her. And you do things I don't fully understand with money and property and foundations. And your family has a complicated history. And you're engaged to Valentina Ricci, who was photographed at the Palazzo Fendi fundraiser in March. And I don't know whether writing that note was the smartest or the most reckless thing I've done in 2 years. Both, he said. Both, she agreed. He turned his coffee cup once. What did you hear? He said. Exactly, she told him. She had a gift for exact reproduction, and she used it. Not just the words, but the order, the pauses, the drop-in register that had told her the woman at table 9 knew she was saying something she shouldn't. When she finished, Mateo was still. Not the stillness of someone absorbing a surprise, the stillness of someone who had already known something and was now hearing it confirmed with specificity. Thursday, he said again. I heard Thursday. He nodded once. He looked out the window at the Prati Street, where the midday foot traffic was moving in the unhurried way of a city that has decided to eat lunch. Why did you do it? He said. You could have heard it and said nothing. Most people would. She thought about her mother. She thought about the school with no running water. You talked about those children like they were real to you, she said. Like it wasn't a thing you said to make yourself sound a certain way at restaurants. You talked about it like it was a problem you were actually trying to solve. She looked at her water glass. I couldn't let someone take that from you without you knowing. He was quiet for a long moment. The foundation will be protected regardless, he said. The account will be restructured before Thursday. What she did will be corrected. I know, she said. That's not why I wrote the note. He looked at her. I wrote it because you should know, she said. That's all. You should know what someone did. He held her gaze and she held his. And it was one of those moments that is over quickly and that you carry for a long time afterward. You were passed over for promotion 2 months ago, he said. She blinked. You had someone look into me. Yes, that's quite invasive. It is, he agreed, without apology. You said nothing about it. Took no action. It wasn't worth the fight. Why not? She thought about Giordano. About the cousin in management. About the specific calculation of a woman who cannot afford to be difficult. Because I need the job, she said, simply, and I knew what was true about my work even if no one else was going to acknowledge it. That has to be enough sometimes. He looked at her for a moment in a way that was not assessment and was not inventory. What happened to the tutoring agency? He said. She told him that too. Not all of it, the shape of it, the size of the loss, the 16 months it had taken her to stop reaching for her phone to call a business partner who had taken the number with him. The math of starting over at 28 in a city where everyone is starting over and almost no one says so. He listened without redirecting, without offering solutions before she'd finished. She noticed this. She noticed the particular quality of his listening, which was like the quality of his stillness, complete, without performance. The man who took the account, he said. His name. That's not why I told you. I know. He waited. His name. She looked at him. She thought about her 1,700 euros. She thought about the lease. She told him the name. He wrote nothing down. She understood that he didn't need to. Your break ends in 4 minutes, he said. She stood. She had her apron in her hands. She'd carried it out of habit, still folded. The woman at table 9, she said. What will happen to her? Her engagement to me will end tonight, he said. What happens after that depends on how cooperative she is in a conversation she will find difficult. A pause. Nothing permanent. Nothing you need to worry about. She looked at him. I wasn't worried about her. I know, he said. You were asking about your own culpability, whether bringing this to me set something in motion you're responsible for. She hadn't quite known that was what she was asking until he said it. You're not, he said. She set it in motion. You only told the truth. She nodded. She started to turn. Sophia, he said. She turned back. Come back to table 12 this evening, he said. I'll make a reservation. She looked at him for one more beat. "I'll see if the section's available," she said. It was. She'd made certain of it before the afternoon service started. 3 things happened that afternoon, none of which Sophia knew about. The first, Cesare made 2 calls and then sent a single encrypted message to a law firm in Geneva. By 4 o'clock, the Conti Foundation account had a new security architecture that Valentina's contact in Zurich could not access, had never been able to access, and would now find had never existed in the form they had been promised. The second, Valentina Ricci received a call from her contact in Zurich, who was agitated, who told her that the structure wasn't there, that the window was closing, and that something had gone wrong. Valentina went still in a way that she was very practiced at, and said she would look into it, and ended the call. She sat for a long moment in her apartment in Perioli, looking out at the terrace garden she had planted herself, piece by piece, over 3 years, and she understood with the cold clarity of someone very intelligent that the napkin had found its way to the right pocket, and that her careful, documented, deniable plan had a very specific sounding hole in it. She didn't know how. She knew why. The third, the man who had taken Sophia's client list and operating account and moved to Milan found, in the space of one afternoon, that his 3 largest current clients had simultaneously received better offers from agencies he had not heard of, that his office lease had been flagged for a zoning review that had apparently been pending for 2 years and had now become urgent, and that a professional association he belonged to had received an anonymous tip about certain financial practices in his previous partnership that they were ethically obliged to investigate. He would spend 4 weeks unraveling what had happened to him. He would never fully understand it. He would eventually call Sophia's old business number, disconnected, and then her personal number, which went to voicemail, and leave a message that began with "I've been thinking about what happened and I want to," before the voicemail cut him off at 30 seconds. She did not call back. Table 12. 8 o'clock. Sophia had changed into the clean version of her uniform, same black, pressed instead of soft, and had spent exactly as much time on her appearance as she always did, which was to say enough, and not more. She brought the water. She brought the menu. She brought the bread without being asked, because she always brought the bread and he had been there once, and she thought he probably knew this about her now. He was reading something on his phone when she arrived. He put it face down when she sat. She hadn't been asked to sit, but the chair across from him was pulled out, and she was not going to pretend she hadn't understood the invitation. "It's done," he said. "The account is protected. The exposure is corrected. All in one afternoon," she said. "I work quickly when it matters." He looked at her. "Valentina and I spoke at 6 o'clock. The engagement is over." She didn't say she was sorry. She looked at him and tried to read whether he was. "Are you all right?" she said. He thought about it, which she appreciated. The question had been serious, and he treated it as such. "I trusted someone for 3 years who was patient enough to wait 3 years," he said. "That's not a grief. That's a miscalculation." A pause. "The grief is that I should have seen it, and I told myself what I wanted to be true instead of looking at what was actually there." "Everyone does that," she said. "Not everyone builds things that other people can use as leverage." She looked at him. "The children in Calabria. The school." "The school breaks ground in March," he said. "Nothing delayed." She let out a breath she hadn't known she'd been holding. He watched her do it. "That's why you wrote the note," he said. "Not for me. For the 23 kids," she said. "And also for you. Both can be true." He looked at her in that particular way again. Not inventory, not assessment. Something more like recognition. "The man who took your agency," he said. You'll hear from the association by the end of the week. There's also a financial matter that will resolve itself through channels that won't require your involvement." She stared at him. "I didn't ask you to do that." "No, I told you his name in confidence." "You told me his name," he said. "What I did with it is my responsibility, not yours." She was quiet for a moment. She thought about 1,700 euros. She thought about the lease. She thought about the 16 months she had spent not calling that number. "Is it done in a way I'd be comfortable with?" she said. He looked at her steadily. His reputation is damaged. His clients have options. His practices are being examined by people whose job it is to examine them. He is not hurt. He is accountable. She was quiet. "That's very precise," she finally said. "I told you," he said. "I work quickly, and I'm a precise person." The restaurant moved around them. Cutlery, conversation, the low music that Setimo played at a volume that allowed people to feel private. She thought about her section, which was covered for another 40 minutes, and about Amir, who had looked at her before the dinner service with an expression she couldn't quite read, and had simply said "careful" and then gone back to his pastry. She wasn't sure careful was the right word anymore. Careful had gotten her through the last 14 months. Careful had gotten her not promoted and not acknowledged and not protected from anything. What had worked, the one thing that had actually changed anything, was 9 words on a cocktail napkin that she had almost not written. "My lease is up in 4 months, she said. "I know. I wasn't asking you to do anything about that. I know that too." He looked at her. "I'm telling you so that if a solution presents itself in the next 4 months, you understand it's not charity. It would be a straightforward business arrangement with an entity that values the specific quality of thinking you demonstrated this week." She looked at him. "Are you offering me a job?" "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight I'm asking what you'd like to eat." She looked at the menu that had been sitting unopened between them for 10 minutes. "The gnocchi," she said. "And whatever you're having." He raised his hand. The server, Paloma's Roman equivalent, a young man who moved like water, appeared immediately. She watched Matteo order an Italian that was native and clean, and had the cadence of someone who learned the language before they learned to doubt themselves. She watched his hands on the table, still, not fidgeting, belonging to someone who had made his peace with waiting. She thought, "I don't know this man." She thought, "I know more about him from 4 conversations than I knew about my business partner after 3 years. She thought, "I am going to stop being careful in the way that keeps me small and start being careful in the way that keeps me intact, and those are different things, and I think I finally understand the difference." The food arrived. They ate. They talked. About Calabria, about the tutoring work she'd loved, about a book she mentioned and he had read, about Rome in November, which was either the best time to be there or the worst, depending on whether you minded rain. "I don't mind rain," she said. "I do," he said. "But I stay anyway." She looked at him. "Why?" He looked out the window at the Prati street, the November wet of it, the lamplight catching the cobblestones. "I built everything I have here," he said. "The things worth keeping are here." A pause. They were. They're changing. She understood he wasn't talking about the city. She looked at her plate. She looked at the window. She looked at the man across the table who had stood up very slowly the night before, folded a napkin into his pocket, and done in 48 hours what she had spent 14 months unable to do for herself, not because he was more capable, but because he was allowed to, because the world had given him instruments she hadn't been handed, and he had known where to point them. She thought, "This is complicated." She thought, complicated is not the same as wrong. She thought, I know the difference. The promotion that went to the wrong person, she said. I'd like it acknowledged. Not by you, by Giordano. He looked at her. I'm not asking you to do anything about it, she said. I'm telling you it matters to me. I'm telling you the shape of what I want, so you know it, so there's nothing I haven't said out loud. He held her gaze. A long moment. That's a reasonable thing to want, he said, and I won't touch it. It's yours to take. I know, she said. I'm going to take it tomorrow. He raised his water glass slightly, the smallest of gestures. She raised hers. On Thursday, the Zurich structure that had been designed to drain the Conti Foundation account was found to reference a series of transfers that had never occurred, to an account that had been closed 14 months earlier and therefore could not receive them, through a mechanism that the firm's compliance officer had apparently approved without reading the documentation, which had not, in fact, existed in the form described. The attorney who had prepared the documentation was invited to explain this in a meeting that was not his idea, and from which he emerged with a very clean understanding of what came next. Valentina Ricci spent Thursday signing papers. The apartment in Parioli was hers, had always been, under her own name through a structure that Matteo had insisted on 3 years ago, because he believed the people he loved should have things that were theirs regardless of what happened to him. She understood now what that generosity had cost him to extend to her. She signed the last paper and looked at the terrace garden and thought about what it had taken to grow it, and she was not a sentimental woman. But she sat for a moment before she made the next call. She made the next call. She was cooperative. Entirely, she gave names, dates, account numbers, and a full accounting of the mechanism she had used to access the access she had been given. By Friday morning, the 2 men she'd worked with were experiencing the beginning of an institutional unraveling that would take 6 months to complete. They would not be hurt. They would be accountable. The distinction had been made clear to Valentina, who had understood that it was also a message about her own continued well-being, and had been grateful for the clarity. Sophia went to Giordano's office on Wednesday morning, before the lunch service, and sat across from him with her hands flat on her thighs, and told him plainly that she had looked at the performance records for the last quarter, that her customer return rate and average table spend and review score were each the highest in the restaurant, that she had trained 2 servers in the last 2 months as a courtesy and not a requirement, and that she expected the oversight of 2 months ago to be corrected in the next review cycle. Giordano looked at her for a moment. He was not a brave man, but he was not, in the end, a foolish one. I'll review the cycle, he said. I'd appreciate that, she said. Thank you, Giordano, she stood. She went back to her section. Amir caught her eye through the kitchen window and raised his eyebrows. She made a small, controlled gesture that could have meant fine or later, and went to her first table. That evening, at the end of the dinner service, Matteo was at the bar when she came out of the break room with her coat. He was not at table 12. He was simply there, the way he had been on Tuesday night when he'd waited until her break, without ceremony, without taking up more space than was necessary, like a man who has learned that patience is not the same as passivity. The review cycle, she said. What about it? Giordano is correcting it. Good, he said. I had nothing to do with that. I know. She had known. He had said he wouldn't touch it, and he had meant it. She had filed this information in the growing record of things that were true about him. November in Rome, he said. Since you don't mind the rain. She looked at him. Outside the restaurant window, the street was slick and lamp-lit, the kind of Rome evening that people take photographs of and that people who live there treat as ordinary. Where? She said. I know a place on the river, he said. They close the kitchen at 11. We have time. She buttoned her coat. She thought about Via Candia and 4 months and 1,700 euros and everything she had built and lost and started building again. She thought about 9 words on a cocktail napkin and a man who had stood up very slowly and everything that had moved since then. She thought, the careful version of me goes home. Lead the way, she said. He held the door. They went out into the Rome rain, which was fine and cold and smelled of the river. And he did not take her arm, and she did not need him to, and they walked in that specific way of 2 people who have not yet closed the distance, but are no longer pretending the distance isn't smaller than it was. The city moved around them. The school in Calabria was breaking ground in March. The account was protected. The man who had taken her agency was accountable. She was getting her promotion, and she was walking in the rain in Rome in November with a complicated man who had stood up very slowly from table 12 and changed the Thursday structure of an entire organization because she had written 9 words on a napkin. Not for him, not for herself, but because she hadn't been able to pretend she didn't see what she'd seen. Her mother called every Sunday. Next Sunday, she thought, she might have something to say. The river appeared at the end of the street, black and shining, carrying the lights of the city on its back. There, he said, and pointed. She looked. She smiled. She kept walking. Sophia spent her whole career in rooms that underestimated her, and she let them, because she needed the job and she knew what she was worth, even when nobody else was keeping track. Then one night she heard something she wasn't supposed to hear. And she didn't pretend she hadn't. And everything changed. Not because someone saved her, because she refused to look away, even when looking was dangerous, even when staying quiet was easier, even when she was the only person in the room who thought the truth was worth the risk. That's the kind of quiet that moves things. Tell me in the comments. When did you first understand what Sophia was? Was it when she took the table as a favor without being asked? When she asked Matteo if he was all right, before asking about herself? Or when she walked into Giordano's office alone and said what she was owed? Drop your moment below. I read every single one. If you want more stories about women who know exactly who they are even when nobody's paying attention, follow along. New one every day. One last thing. The man who took Sophia's agency got her voicemail when he called. He heard 30 seconds of what he planned to say, and then the tone cut him off. She never called back. But Amir listened to the full message she showed him on a rainy Friday at the end of the dinner service, and he said 4 words. What he said is the next story.